Oh, such a powerful song to use, especially on this day around the challenging news cycle, right? Of letting people go, of freeing people, and our conversation afterwards about sex trafficking. That's been in the news. But I want to quote my dear, dear Auntie Annabelle, and outrageous. This is truly her, Susan, even though you questioned her reality with me the other day. When I would stay overnight at my Auntie Annabelle's home, she would sing this song as our wake-up song. And it's good morning to you, good morning to you. We're in all our places with sunshiny faces, and this is the way we start the new day. Can you just play that for us? Morning to you, in our places with sunshiny faces. This is the way to start a new day. Has anybody ever had that song sung to them, or do you know the song? Okay. I didn't realize until I did a little bit of research that it was written by Abby Farewell Brown, and my aunt in Mississippi, in Boonville, Mississippi, knew the song, and she sang it to us every morning and to her own children. I love the way that Arnie framed the Moses story at the beginning, and I think that would have been a sufficient message for today. He was one of those bright, shiny, sunshiny faces, at least in the narrative this morning. During the Hebrews' 40 years in the desert, wandering, Moses had made the trek up to the top of the mountain as a mountain climber 2 times, up to Mount Sinai. And the narrative we have today was his second trip up and then his second trip down. But after his second trip up, he returns to the people. He has that strange experience that Arnie shared. When he arrives and shares the message of God with the people, his face is shiny, so shiny that they were afraid of him. The account, I think, sounds incredibly silly to our modern ears, right? But I think you've probably noticed shiny faces on each other once in a while if you've been in the presence of the sacred. I know when Arnie came back from the El Camino, he had a shiny face. Some of you have had shiny faces around maybe as you help out with people experiencing homelessness. I've noticed that. When you've been helping out with the migrants here at First Church, your face shines because it's that light of love and caring and compassion and justice, and it becomes contagious. It's that effervescent feeling that comes from being involved in something bigger than yourself and helping you to get out of yourself. I've seen people light up when they sit with children or adults. I see all of your faces light up when we sit with the children in our community here, and they share their stories, and we share reflections and laughter. I know my face lights up when I look at a monsoon that's heading into the valley, especially at night, and I recognize the power of God and the power of creation. When I first saw blossoms on the top of those old saguaros when I was hiking, my face was shining, and I fell to the ground with wonder at how this dry and dusty desert can produce such beautiful blooms. So this morning, we're all here with our shiny faces, our bright, shiny faces, ready for me to head out for my 49 days of sabbatical, 9 more than Moses up on the mountain. I hope I return with a bright, shiny face because of my experiences with God, yes, Arnie, but also my experience with the humans and humanity along the way, and hopefully because a bit of rest. And I have to say, I need to commit to you as a faith community of spending more intense time on the mountain or in the valley, face to face with the divine, or face to face with self, the spirit within. Because those are one of the things that falls off the to-do list for clergy with all of the other unpredictableness of ministry. And if I'm not connecting to spirit or going to the mountain or to the valley or just being present with self on a moment-by-moment basis, I am not going to shine goodness, love, justice, probably just fatigue, and incredibly lawn and leaf-sized bags under my eyes. In fact, I realized that this week when I was in a small administrative meeting, and I kind of lost my cool a bit and had to apologize. I realize sometimes and right now my spirit connection is sorely lacking. And in my mind and in my heart, I said this to myself. All of us have the very same challenge. Moses, Arnie, Shirley, his wife, me and you, and Susan. The challenge seeking to remain and grow into an even deeper relationship and connection to the Spirit so that we can shine. All of the stuff that's happening around us right now, in our culture, in our society, on our media, on our screens, are they going to raid? Aren't they going to raid? Who's next? Our goodness and our energy puts us into places of fear and scarcity. And that's why I think it's so important to sing songs like "Oh Happy Day," when Jesus washed our fears away. And we can choose in those moments to end up being negative Nancys, and I apologize to the Nancys ahead of time, or Charlie curmudgeons, and Charlie, I apologize to you. We get into that place, right, of being negative Nancys and Charlie curmudgeons because we're not connected to others and to self and to the divine. God may call us into difficult places, but the Spirit goes with us into every hard circumstance. I don't attribute all the life-zapping events of our world to God, very honestly. I've had a lot of conversations these last few weeks where people are saying, I don't really know if God exists. Look at the world as it is. How could God exist in such a world and in such beings as us? But we have the choice to do the right thing. We have the choice to be the change. We have the choice to work for justice and equity and for equality, or we have the choice to promote injustice and division. Humanity is powerful and divinity is even more powerful, and we can create a different world if we move out of our silos and we work together with God and with one another. So I want to find out today, how do we get our faces to shine like Moses? Moses somehow got it right. He had the key to the shining face, which, by the way, tradition tells us stayed with him for the next 40 years until he died. This is modern-day Mount Sinai. Moses believed in his day that God resided on the top of that mountain. In the late 1200s, Meister Eckhart, who was a German theologian and a mystic, said this. He said, "Apprehend God in all things, for God is in all things. Every single creature is full of God and is a book about God. Every creature is a word of God." For some reason, that was not Moses' connection to God. He saw God in a place, a location, in a space on the top of a mountain. But many of us still live that way, don't we? As if God is up there, out there in the sky or in some heaven light years away. But Meister Eckhart notes, God is in everything, in all beings. And Jesus himself teaches that the Spirit is in us, in you and in me. And we don't need to go any further than even our own breath to experience the presence of God and to connect with the sacred. So I ask myself, if God is as close as my breath, why do I not connect? Moses and his God Yahweh conversed long and hard on that mountain. Man, I wish I would have been there to know what kind of interaction was happening internally in Moses, what kind of interaction was happening with burning bushes and tablets of stone and veiled faces. Those were spectacular times. And the strange thing is, the first time that Moses comes down from the mountain, you all know the story, he smashes those 10 commandments that are written on stone, those moral codes that have been with most cultures and societies throughout the ages, when he sees the people and what they had done during his 40 days' absence. They'd pulled their resources of gold and silver, melted it down into a golden calf. That became their object of hope and adoration. Now, Susan, make sure that doesn't happen here. I don't know if we'd melt down our gold or what we'd melt down, but yeah. So without a leader, they lost their faith and they lost their hope. And then God wants to obliterate the Hebrew people for creating this false God and forsaking their one true God. But Moses, out of his compassion and beauty, even though God says, step out of the way, I'm going to squash these people and I'm going to wipe them off the face of the earth, which many have tried to do with the Jewish people since then. But instead of stepping out of the way, the amazing thing is that Moses argues with God and argues God on of his intended destruction of the people. Good work, Moses. Moses refuses to live in a world where Yahweh does not forgive even the greatest of evil. I think that's part of why Moses shined, because he advocated for others. I also believe Moses was shining because on his second trip to the mountain, I think he was really honest with God. He had a shoe-off conversation. No longer did he necessarily fear this God, but he spoke his truth to this God. And he found his place of mercy and compassion. Moses, on that second trip, had deepened his experience and his relationship with his God. Strange thing is, though when Moses comes down off the mountain, if you notice in the reading, he is not aware of his brightness. I think that's the way it is with people who have been with God in the Spirit, is they're not really aware because they just do it, and they just live into it. The spiritual leader who walks that thin path between the amazing truths of God and then putting too much on the people, the balance, the challenge, I think Moses was really unaware of the power and the spirit that was radiating from him. Now, if I climbed up to Camelback Mountain, which is probably the most popular mountain here in Phoenix, right? And I returned with an amazing bright face claiming that I was face to face with God and God told me to tell you, well, I think you would probably cart me off to St. Luke's psych ward. Or next Sunday, when I would have been released from the psych ward, you'd want to come back to hear more of the crazy pastor, entertaining, or maybe the pews would be empty. I don't think Moses shines as a result of his own charisma. If you remember, Moses in the beginning was not really very charismatic. He makes every excuse in the book why God should not use him. He says, I'm not qualified. I don't know enough. They will not believe me. I'm not eloquent. And finally he says, come on, God, just send somebody else. I have had every one of those excuses in the book. When we meet with God, when you and I spend time experiencing God, I don't think God really cares about our excuses. But when we return from those experiences, we shine, and we're even unaware that we're shining. I love mystic Hildegard of Bingen. She says this, and I think this is what those intimate experiences with God are. She says, God hugs you. You're encircled by the arms of the mystery of God. You shine so finely, it surpasses understanding. Every day we are invited into the arms and into the hug of God. God encircles us with God's mysterious arms. And there we connect with our inner spirit and we shine. In that mystical hug, that mystical embrace, we can find the strength to come down off those mountains of isolation and reflect God to a world that is in desperate need of the reflection of God in each of us. I've learned, as Moses did, that I can come up with every excuse under the sun not to shine. In fact, there was a moment this morning when Al, our custodian, came to the office door when Susan and I are getting ready, and I'm finishing touches on the sermon, and he says, there's a homeless woman out here that wants you to pray with her. And in my mind, I went, darn it, wouldn't you know it, another interruption. I wasn't willing to shine. And then I said, James, come on, whip it up. This is your call. This is who you're to be. These are the people you believe we're called to serve. And of course, I brought Susan out, and we prayed for her along with our friend in the front row. I've learned, as Moses did, that I can come up with every sort of excuse, but I also love what J. Cole, a rapper and singer that, yes, will probably be on my tunes, he says, I'd rather be happy being myself than sad trying to please everybody else. You know what I also think this narrative is calling us to, and this is a bit of my detour today? I really want authentic and truthful leaders. Leaders who don't seek power and heirs, but are their true, authentic self. I don't know if one of the 20 Democratic potentials can do that. I don't know if any Republican can do that. But Moses was that kind of leader. We need leaders like Moses. We have way too many lying political and spiritual leaders, and I think humanity and humans just simply want truth. We all eat lies when our hearts are hungry. Isn't that the truth for today? We go on our websites and our Twitters and our tweeters and our whatever, right? And we eat all those lies because our hearts are hungry for truth. And our hearts are hungry for an experience with God. And there are countless numbers of people that seek God and experience with God and find themselves so misdirected. We seek the experience of God that takes away our sadness and fills us with the light of joy. An experience of God that takes away our fear and fills us with confidence and hope. An experience with God that takes away our hatred and fills us with love and compassion. In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. George Orwell said that. In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And I think when Moses came down the mountain, he spoke his truth and God's truth. And that was revolutionary. Second detour. Most of you know that I'm on the advisory board for the police chief, Faith Community Advisory Board. And no doubt you've heard about the recent news story, right? About the verbal, physical abuse of a family caught at shoplifting. Those of us on the advisory board have been in close contact with our police chief, Williams, and honestly, all we're asking for is truth. Is honest conversation to admit our fears, talk it out, speak it out, both black, blue, white, and brown, admit that our systems are racist and broken, and let's do the spiritual work of dealing with our internalized fear of black and brown bodies. One of my favorite authors, as you well know, says this: sometimes people try to destroy you precisely because they recognize your power. Not because they don't see it, but because they see it and they don't want it to exist. You, this little colonial church in the corner, you are a powerful force in the community. People know who you are. I believe Moses was the kind of leader that never seemed to lose his ability to connect back to his beginning, back to his humble roots, admit his inadequacies, and not abuse his power, because he relied on God's power at work through him. So today I say we need some time on the mountain. And I follow Jesus, the way, the truth, the life. And Jesus always was going away to quiet places and quiet spaces, going to a mountain, going to a garden, going to a spot in the desert by our precious water, and taking time to listen, and listen to the still, small voice of his God. And I would like you over the next 7 weeks to join me in listening to the still, small voice of God. I'm going to be researching movements, understanding how the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s can inform movements today. I have no clue whose spirit is going to put in my path or whose path I will end up in. 7 weeks to be in silence as I drive, 7 weeks to be in conversation, 7 weeks to be in study, 7 weeks to be in meditation, to discover within myself the journey within and the journey without, and part of where we take our community of faith. So I was supposed to talk about what I'm going to bring back from the sabbatical today. Lots of rocks. I do love rocks. I'm going to take tokens and mementos because I like to buy more stickers to the back of my pickup to be as obnoxious as I possibly can. And in people's faces when I'm at stoplights. I love books. I'm going to buy books. Sorry, can't read on the Kindle. I'm going to probably share some stories, but I'm also going to take a lot of stories from the people I run into and the reflections of the people that I run into. And how their lives have crossed and intersected mine, and how my life has crossed and intersected theirs, and how we've been touched by the same God. And also, hopefully, I will have a shining face because I'll take some rest. And hopefully hear what the Spirit is willing to say to this community and the next steps we are to take as we continue on for this next 100 years. Pastor Susan reminded me, as I said, this fourth message was incredibly difficult for me because I felt like I said everything in the first three, and then I sat down to write, I realized I hadn't said anything. And it was excruciatingly painful to find a conclusion. And she reminded me, guess what? The journey may not have a conclusion. And I'm like, oh, duh. The journey may not ever conclude. And when Pastor Susan said that, I remember this quote from Arthur Ashe, which says, "Success is a journey, not a destination. The doing is often more important than the outcome." And I thought that might be a good way to close, because I'm supposed to come back and share my outcomes. But I have one more thought about shining. This is my very last thought for each of you. Shine so bright it burns the corneas of those who want you small. Shine so bright that it burns the corneas of those who want you small. So as a community, if we can really walk into that, right, into that place and into that space as people, when we're on the mountaintop, when we're in the valley, wherever we find ourselves on the journey, if we shine so bright that it burns the corneas of those who want to keep us small, as God-loving, justice-seeking people of faith. So in that spirit, we're going to sing about the moon and the stars. And the moon shines, the stars shine, the sun shines, that we're all called to shine into the lives of everybody that we have an opportunity to interact with, which this song is so beautifully inclusive. So please rise and let us join.